I didn't say a word when my son-in-law called. I just stood at the kitchen window of my cottage, watching the first snow of November settle onto the dock, and I let him talk. He had that voice, the one I'd come to recognize over 7 years of Sunday dinners and forced small talk. The voice of a man who had already decided something and was simply informing you of it. Not asking. Informing. "We've found a solution for Mum and Dad," he said. "They can't manage the stairs in the townhouse anymore. The doctor says another winter in the city is a real risk, so we've sorted it out. They'll take the main bedroom at the lake. You've got that whole ground floor to yourself anyway." I held the phone and watched a chickadee land on the birch branch just outside the glass. It tilted its head. I understood exactly how it felt. "Dad, you there?" "I'm here," I said. "Good. They're planning to arrive the last weekend of November, before the really bad weather hits. We'll drive them up ourselves." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I said I understood, and I thanked him for letting me know, and I set the phone down on the counter when we were done. Then I put the kettle on and sat at the table where my wife Eleanor used to do the crossword puzzle every Saturday morning, and I thought about what I was going to do. I should explain what this place means, because without that, nothing else makes sense. The cottage on Lac Beauchamp had been in Eleanor's family for 41 years. Her parents had bought the land in the early 80s, back when this part of the Laurentians was still considered too far from Montreal to bother with. Her father had built the dock himself, one summer, with help from a neighbor whose name I never learned, but whose initials were still carved into one of the posts. Eleanor grew up here every July. She learned to swim off this dock. She proposed to me here. Actually, she always insisted on telling that version of the story, and she was right. She did ask first, though I had the ring in my coat pocket, and was waiting for a better moment that never seemed to arrive. When her parents passed, the property came to Eleanor. When Eleanor passed 3 years ago, it came to me. I retired 14 months later. I sold the house in Brossard. I loaded my truck and I drove north, and I have not regretted a single day of it. The cottage isn't grand. 3 bedrooms, a wood stove, a screened porch that faces west over the water. The internet is slow and the road floods every spring, and the nearest grocery store is 40 minutes away. None of that bothers me. What I have here is quiet. What I have here is Eleanor, in some form I can't quite explain, in the smell of the cedar walls, in the way the light comes off the lake at 4 in the afternoon in October, in the crossword books she left in the drawer that I have never been able to throw away. My daughter Claire lives in Montreal with her husband, my son-in-law, whose name is Mathieu. I want to be fair about Mathieu. He is not a cruel man. He is not even at heart a bad man. He is a man who has always found the shortest distance between a problem and someone else's resources, and who has never once been told that this is not actually a solution. His parents, Gilles and Francine, I had met perhaps a dozen times over the years. They were loud in the way that some people are loud to fill space, and they had opinions about everything: my truck, my retirement, the price of heating oil, the best route to take between any 2 points in Quebec. Gilles had retired early from a sales job and had spent the decade since explaining to anyone who would listen how he would have done things differently if given the chance. Francine collected grievances the way other people collect decorative plates. The idea that they were going to move into Eleanor's cottage, into Eleanor's bedroom, and that Mathieu had announced this to me, the way you announce a change in cable providers, settled somewhere behind my sternum like a coal that wouldn't stop burning. I called Claire that evening. She picked up on the second ring. "Dad?" Her voice was careful. "Tell me what's happening," I said. There was a pause. "Mathieu told you?" "He did. I was going to call. We've been trying to figure out the logistics and it got..." "Claire," I kept my voice even. "Tell me what's happening." She explained it in the way she had explained things since she was a teenager, leading with the practical details to avoid getting to the emotional ones. The stairs, the doctor's recommendation, the cost of assisted living in the city, which she mentioned twice, in a way that was clearly meant to land somewhere specific. $4,500 a month for a decent place, she said. "We just can't manage that right now, Dad. You have all that space up there." "I have Eleanor's space," I said. Silence. "I understand the situation with Gilles and Francine is difficult," I said. "I want to help where I can, but I need you to understand something, and I need you to hear me clearly. I was not consulted about this. I was told. Your husband called me and told me when his parents were arriving at my home. That is not something I'm willing to accept. Dad, he didn't mean it like, I'm not angry at you, I said. I love you. But I need you to understand my position before we go any further. She said she did. She said she was sorry. She said she would talk to Matthew. I thanked her, and I said goodnight, and then I opened my laptop, and I started making phone calls. The first call was to a lawyer in Saint Jerome named Isabelle Tremblay, who had helped me with the transfer of the property when Eleanor passed, and who I had liked immediately because she did not waste words. I told her the situation. She was quiet for a moment. The property is solely in your name? She asked. It is. And your daughter is not on the title? No co-ownership? No life interest registered anywhere? Nothing. Eleanor and I updated everything when we did our wills. Then the legal position is simple, she said. No one may occupy your property without your permission. If they arrive, and you have not given written consent, you can have them removed. The question is less about law, and more about what outcome you actually want. That was the right question. I thought about it for 2 days. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want Claire to be caught in the middle of something that would poison the next 20 years of our relationship. And I didn't want to simply say no and have Matthew find another angle, another pressure point, another Sunday dinner where he would work on Claire until she called me again with that careful voice. I wanted something permanent, something that couldn't be undone by a phone call or a family guilt trip, something that would protect this place not just for me, but after me, so that when I was gone, Matthew couldn't simply wait out the clock and do as he pleased with Eleanor's land. On the third day, I drove into town and had coffee with my neighbor Robert, who had lived on the lake for 30 years and knew everyone worth knowing in the municipality. I told him what I was thinking. He set down his cup and looked at me for a long moment. You know about the Heritage Designation Program? He said. I told him I'd heard of it, vaguely. He smiled. Let me give you a number. Quebec's Heritage and Natural Environment Protection Framework is not something most people know about until they need it. I spent a week learning everything I could. I spoke to the municipal office. I spoke to a heritage consultant Robert recommended. I spoke again to Isabelle Tremblay, who had done some work in this area and who confirmed that what I was considering was not only legal but, in her words, quite elegant. The short version is this. The property had several features that qualified it for formal recognition: the age of the original structure, the intact shoreline, the mature tree coverage, the presence of a nesting habitat for several protected bird species that a biologist friend of Robert's came and documented over 2 days in November. Once registered under the appropriate designation, the property would be subject to a set of binding covenants, restrictions on modification, on subdivision, on commercial use, and critically, on occupancy arrangements that conflicted with the preservation mandate. It would mean I couldn't do certain things with the land either. I had thought about that carefully. I was at peace with it. I had no intention of subdividing the shoreline or building a second structure or renting the place out on weekends. What I wanted was exactly what the designation protected, for the land to remain what it was, undisturbed, for as long as possible. The process took just under 3 weeks. There was paperwork, there were site visits, there was a registration fee and a filing with the municipality, and a notification that went on the public record. When it was done, Isabel sent me the confirmation documents and a short note that said, "Congratulations, the property is now protected in perpetuity. I hope you enjoy the quiet." I put the letter in the drawer with Eleanor's crossword books. Matthew called on a Thursday, 2 days before he and Claire were planning to drive his parents up to the lake. He was in his car, I could hear the highway in the background, and he was using his other voice now, the warmer one, the one he used when he wanted something and knew the direct approach hadn't worked. "We're all looking forward to seeing the place," he said. "Mum is very excited. She's been telling everyone about the lake." "I'm sure she has," I said. "I just wanted to confirm the timing. We're thinking Saturday around noon." "Matthew," I said, "before you make that drive, there's something you should know." He went quiet. I told him about the heritage designation. I told him calmly and without drama, the way you read someone a weather forecast. I explained what it meant, that the property was now a registered heritage site with binding covenants of occupancy and use, that any arrangement involving non-owner long-term residents would require review and approval under the designation agreement, that the process for such a review took a minimum of 6 months and required documentation I did not intend to provide. I told him that he was, of course, welcome to come up Saturday with Claire, that I would be very happy to see my daughter, that his parents were welcome to visit as guests for a weekend, the way guests visit, but that they would not be moving in. The highway noise continued for a moment. "I don't understand," he said finally. "You did this on purpose." "I protected my property," I said, "which is something I should have done more clearly from the beginning. I apologize for not being direct sooner. I'm being direct now." Another silence. Then, Claire is my daughter and I love her," I said. "This has nothing to do with Claire. I'd like you to think about that before Saturday." I didn't wait for him to answer. I thanked him for calling, and I said goodbye. Saturday came cold and bright, the kind of November day in the Laurentians that looks like a painting of itself. The bare birches against the gray sky, the lake perfectly still, a skim of ice forming at the edges of the dock. Claire arrived alone. She came through the door and she stood in the kitchen, and she looked at me for a moment, and I could see she had been crying, not recently but earlier, and that she had made some kind of decision on the drive up. "Where's Matthew?" I asked. "He dropped me off," she said. "He's taking his parents back to the city." I put the kettle on. She sat at the table where her mother used to do the crossword. We didn't talk about it directly, not at first. We talked about the ice on the lake and a fox I'd seen twice that week near the woodpile and the state of the road. We had tea. I made the sandwiches Eleanor used to make, old cheddar and mustard on sourdough, nothing complicated, and we ate them looking out at the water. After a while, Claire said, "He told me what you did, with the designation." "Yes." He was furious. "I imagine it." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I didn't know you'd been planning it." "I hadn't been planning it long," I said. The situation clarified my thinking. She was quiet then. "Was it because of me? Because you thought after you're gone that Matthew would—" "Partly," I said honestly. "But mostly it was because this place belongs to your mother. It belongs to her memory, and to everything her family built here. And I realized that I had an obligation to protect that, regardless of whatever pressure came along. I should have been clearer with Matthew from the start. I wasn't, and that was my mistake." Claire looked out at the lake. "His parents are going to need something, a real solution." "I know. And there are real solutions available to them, good ones. I'd be glad to help you research options, if that would be useful. There are excellent residences in the Laurentians, actually. Some of them are quite beautiful." She almost smiled at that. "He's not going to be happy for a while," she said. "No, I don't expect he will be." "Dad." She set down her mug and looked at me directly, the way she had looked at me since she was small when she wanted me to understand something she couldn't quite say. "I think you were right. I think I've known for a while that something wasn't, that I needed to see it more clearly." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "You're here," I said. "That's what matters." We stayed at the table until the light started going off the lake, that particular late afternoon gold that Eleanor had always said was the reason her parents had bought the land in the first place. I made more tea. Claire stayed for dinner. We talked about her mother, which we hadn't done properly in months, and it was a good conversation, the kind that leaves you feeling lighter instead of heavier. Before she left, she stood on the porch and looked out at the water for a moment. "It's beautiful here," she said. "It is," I agreed. "She would have been glad you stayed." I thought about the crossword books in the drawer, and the initials on the dock post, and the way the ice was forming at the edges now, quiet and slow, the way things settle when you finally stop fighting them. "I know she would," I said. I watched Claire's car until the taillights disappeared around the bend in the road, and then I went inside and locked the door and built up the fire, and the only sound in the house was the wood settling and the wind off the lake. And somewhere, far out in the birches, a single chickadee calling before the dark came in. Some things are worth protecting without apology. That's the whole story, really. Everything else is just what happened along the way.